Then this is the fourth volume in a tetralogy, a word I learned today. A tetralogy, a collection of 4 books, a series of 4 books about the Civil War in the West. The Civil War in the West. And those books are the last 4 that I named: The Blaze of Glory, Chain of Thunder. Chain of Thunder, Smoke at Dawn, and The Fateful Lightning. So please help me welcome Jeff Shaara to virtual book signing and everybody else here. Jeff, welcome to virtual book signing. And I won't ask you what brought you to The Fateful Lightning, because you had to write 4 books to get here. But tell our customers and tell the folks here what brought you to the West.
Well, it was primarily, I'd finished working on a set as following up on my father's book on the Killer Angels, which a great many Civil War enthusiasts are very familiar with, and writing the before and the after, the prequel and sequel, Gods and Generals and Last Full Measure. Well, all that deals with the East. And I got all these letters from people in Mississippi and Tennessee saying, we're awfully tired of hearing about Robert E. Lee and Virginia. There's an awful lot of stuff that happens west of the Appalachian Mountains that nobody ever talks about. And that may be somewhat of an exaggeration, but they're right. Some of the battles west of the Appalachians are in the West, and West is a relative term. We're talking everywhere from, you can certainly talk the Trans-Mississippi, but in my case, we're talking basically from Mississippi and Tennessee all the way to North Carolina, and that's what this series covers.
Okay, and I'm from Kansas. So
okay, that's even wester.
It's even wester of that, I suppose. But no, I'm not going to ask you when you're going to come out with the tetralogy of books on the war west of the Mississippi River.
I'll get back to you on that.
But certainly I've heard it said many times before. I think it's a good argument. The war was won in the West.
I agree.
And some of those characters are the characters that won and lost it. What was it like to get to know those characters after getting to know the fabled characters, the Stonewall Jacksons and the Robert E. Lees?
It was actually a lot of fun. It has to be fun, or I can't do it. The nature of the kind of research I do, the original sources, the diaries, the memoirs, the collections of letters, all the accounts of the people who were there, those are the voices. And without sounding schizophrenic about it, hearing those voices is a huge part of the research, an essential part for me to get into their heads. What I'm doing is what a historian does not do. I'm putting words in the mouths of these characters. And those words had better ring true. They better be authentic to who most people believe these characters are, because people care. I'll get grief if I get it wrong. So the way to get it right is to get back and hear as many of those voices as I possibly can. And when you start dealing with people, and going back to the first book, dealing with Shiloh, people like Nathan Bedford Forrest and Albert Sidney Johnston and William Hardy and Beauregard on the southern side, and then you go north and you've got Grant and Sherman. It's fun. It's a great deal of fun to dig into those characters and to try to create people that will make a good story.
Well, what you do, something that historians do not do, and I don't prefer one type of writing over the other, but because historians analyze, they write analytically. They have to. They may not write chronologically. They may not, even the narrative form may not serve the purpose of a history. But these forms of writing that you use, and I'm a liberal arts major, of course, so I have a huge appreciation for drama and for character development and for all that. You don't always get these, and it wouldn't always work in an analytical history. So learning the history of the Civil War, I think if you want to find a real truth to it, you have to look at novels, and you have to look seriously at novels and enjoy the stories, and let a novelist put themselves inside the head and speak the words.
Yeah, there's a risk there. Because I talk to a lot of novelists. I also talk to a lot of historians. A lot of historians would disagree with you. There's the hardcore academics who feel, and I've met these people, who feel that what I do is worthless. I've heard that. On the other hand, I hear from teachers who are using my books in their classroom to teach the subject, because the philosophy is, if you give a student a face, a character that he can relate to, He learns the history in spite of himself. Doesn't even know he's learning the history by getting into the character. I hear a lot of that. When I began to hear that, though, that added to the responsibility I feel to get it right, get the history right. A novelist doesn't have to do that. I mean, a novelist can do anything he wants to, and I mean, it's fiction. My father caught some well-deserved criticism in The Killer Angels for some of his timeline little slippages, and he sort of plays games a little bit with the way some things happen. And in his day, nobody cared. I mean, people weren't looking over his shoulder in the 1960s to see that he got it right. They're looking over my shoulder now. And so I understand that one of my first responsibilities is do the historical research so I get my facts straight. It has to start with that.
Well, you told a story today at our other event. We're up at the Kenosha Civil War Museum in Kenosha, Wisconsin. And you mentioned it before, too, that your readers reach out to you. Your readers reach out to you and say, what about this? What about you? And I'm sure they bring you their stories, the story of their ancestors. And one of the things we found recently, the great writer that sold thousands and thousands of books, I know you'd like to sell as many as him, is Bruce Catton, from back in the 60s. And here is an historian that really appreciated storytelling. And one of the things, when you said that, is that Catton, he was at American Heritage Magazine, so he was always doing that while he was writing. He's always getting these letters saying, I loved your book. My grandfather was in this unit, you mentioned him. And sometimes he'd get a packet of letters, and someone sent Grandpa's papers. And like the Catton papers are at the University of Wyoming now, and just tons and tons of manuscript letters of original soldiers that families had sent those to Catton because he was the voice of the Civil War. And so, I think it's fascinating how you respond to what people are asking you for. I don't think you give them what they want all the time, but you respond.
I hope I give more of them what they want than what they don't want. I mean, otherwise I'm not going to be doing this for very long. But I mean, I list in my book, I mean, I don't have to do this. I mean, as a novel, there are no footnotes, there is no index, but what there is are acknowledgments. And I acknowledge the people whose primary sources I used, and we're talking, Sherman and Joe Johnston, I mean, like the characters. But then also I acknowledge the people who send me things. And these are just people. I mean, these aren't historians, aren't people you know. They're just individuals who provide some piece of information that ends up being incredibly useful. Now, not all the things sent to me are useful. I mean, there are huge hordes of letters where there's really nothing there that you can draw on. But every now and then you find that gem, and I'm happy to acknowledge that in the book. I do every time.
Now let's get to the book. The Fateful Lightning is the fourth book of a tetralogy about the war in the West. What happens on the first page? Where do we pick up?
The first page is Sherman's last day in Atlanta. I start the book not with the battles for Atlanta, and I caught grief from people in Atlanta, and with all due respect, I couldn't do that's another book. All the fights around Atlanta. But I wanted to start with really the first day of the March to the Sea, which is November 16th, 1864. And Sherman's looking on a hillside, and he's overlooking the city of Atlanta, and he's watching the city's death. I mean, he has, the fires have been lit. Now, what Sherman does not do, and this is where you get into these issues of, who was Sherman, how bad was he? And I was in Atlanta a couple days ago. I heard a lot of this. But in fact, what Sherman orders is the destruction of every military target that he can name, or that his engineer Orlando Poe can name. Every factory, every millwork, every storage area, all the railroad tracks, the bridges, anything that's of use to the Confederate Army, he orders it destroyed. He does this all the way through Georgia and into the Carolinas. That's the purpose for the destruction. It's not just to burn down houses just for the sake of burning houses. He never does that. Others under his command do. Some of his cavalry under Kilpatrick, especially in South Carolina, they're pretty brutal what they do. Some of his soldiers, the bummers, the foragers, the people sent out, they do most of the destruction that is credited to Sherman. And Sherman's not real happy about that, at least early on. He tempers his judgment after a while and realizes, well, it's not such a bad thing, and we have to feed the army. I mean, that's really one of the points, is finding the food. So he's watching the destruction of Atlanta, but again, when you're talking about a city made out of wood, and you burn this factory right here, and the wind's blowing, and there's 10 houses down the street, I'm sorry, but sometimes those 10 houses go up in smoke, and that happens a lot.
And Sherman said, might as well appeal against the thunderstorm,
Right.
And then than to stop war,
Right.
Stop the destruction of war. And while we're on the subject of fire, one of the things when I said you don't always give the people exactly what they're asking for, what I think I'm getting at is you go against the standard narrative a lot, the standard narrative history every now and then. Did Sherman burn Columbia?
I ignore the whatever that means. The standard narrative. I don't know that there is a standard narrative of history. Depends on whose book you read. I mean, you can read Shelby Foote's take on Grant, and you can read Catton's take on Grant, and you get two different takes.
Yeah.
So you got a northerner and a southerner. It depends on who you're talking about. And I ignore that. I mean, none of that is what I try to study. I have to find my own narrative. I'm creating a narrative by telling a story. And so I have to do the best job I can do, and whatever, whether it's historians or biographers, whatever they may think of it, really isn't important to me, because that's not the audience I'm trying to reach. I'm not writing for the university professor.
Right.
I'm writing for maybe the university professor's students who might otherwise not care, or they walk out of that classroom and never want to study history again. This brings them back. I hear that a lot from some of these students. Does he burn Columbia? Well, Columbia, South Carolina burns. That's a fact. It's a catastrophic disaster for the citizens of Columbia. It is widely attributed by Southerners, by the people in South Carolina and around Columbia. Sherman did that. Sherman says, no, I didn't. A lot of people around him say, no, he didn't. The Confederate cavalry started that fire by lighting the cotton bales. They left a lot of cotton in Columbia. Cotton's money. And one of the things the Confederates, they don't want the cotton falling into the hands of the Yankees as they come into Columbia. Well, now this is strictly the Sherman point of view here, is that the fires are lit by Wade Hampton and his cavalry. The fires get out of control. There's a windstorm. That's another fact. The winds are whipping incredibly as Sherman rides into Columbia. The scene, as he's looking up, it's like a snowstorm. And he's at first sort of curious about that. And he realizes it's cotton. The cotton bales have been split, and cotton is flying around the air, and it's getting everywhere, including on him. Well, that's the start. Now, there are drunk soldiers. I put this in the book. Sherman runs into a group of guys, Union soldiers, falling down drunk. He hates that. When you've got that kind of rowdy element that you can't control, they don't follow orders. There's nothing you can do. How many of those guys threw a torch or stumbled into a house and, just set fire to something? Certainly that happened. Who's ultimately responsible for the Union Army's acts? Sherman. There's no doubt about that. But does Sherman order the fires? Does Sherman order the city of Columbia to be burned? No. And I stand behind that. There are going to be people, and I'm going to get those letters, there are going to be people who soundly disagree with that. That's fine. This is my story. This is the best story I can tell.
Yeah. Well, we've talked about Sherman as one of the principal voices coming from the Union side, telling the Union side of the story.
Yeah, this is not the Sherman story.
It's not the Sherman story. Yeah, I wanted to get into that. There are Confederate voices. So which historical Confederate did you find had the most compelling story that made you want to give that person the voice?
Yeah, that was easy. I introduced William Hardy in the first book of this series at Shiloh. He plays a key role in the Chattanooga book. Hardy is, to me, in a way, a tragic figure. He's a good general. This guy is a terrific soldier. He's commandant of West Point. He's a West Pointer. He writes the textbook on infantry tactics. It's being used in both armies. And by the time, now he's a general in the Confederate Army, he's in command of a bunch of basically ragtag militia when he's in Macon. He gets his way to Savannah. Hardy's the first man who guesses where Sherman's going on his march to the sea. He figures out it's not Augusta, it's not Macon, he's going to Savannah, and Hardy's there. And Hardy has 9,000 troops, some of which are not very good troops, to defend the city against 60,000 coming at him in blue. He understands mathematics, and he understands that's not going to work. And Hardy's maneuver to escape Savannah is a part of this story. It's brilliant what he was able to pull off, and it's probably Sherman's biggest mistake is letting Hardy slip away. But Hardy, and he goes to Charleston expecting Sherman to come to Charleston, but that's where Hardy's family is. Hardy also hears the voices in Richmond, the newspapers, Jefferson Davis, I'm sorry, but Jefferson Davis is delusional about the South's chances here to win this thing. The newspapers in Richmond are talking about all the things that are going to happen to Sherman. They're all bad. I mean, Sherman's going to be thrown into the sea. His army is going to starve. And all these, the people of Georgia are going to rise up and just, wipe out Sherman's army. Hardy's there. He knows this is not happening this way. None of it's going to happen. They cannot win. He understands, again, numbers. And he understands what Sherman has and what he brings to the equation. But Hardy has to do his duty. He still has to fight. He gets a new commander. Joe Johnston comes back into the scene on the Confederate side as the overall commander in the Carolinas. And Hardy serves under Joe Johnston. But both men understand that all we're doing is delaying the inevitable. And in a way, it's a sad story because this man has honor, integrity, decency, and he's a good soldier. And he's doing his duty in a hopeless situation.
Right. You mentioned earlier today as well that this book is different than many of the others because many of the others have big battle scenes.
Right.
And because big battles happen. And this is a different kind of campaign, isn't it? They move and they move and they move. But one battle that I enjoyed reading about, it's a battle that I enjoyed studying, is that attack on Fort McAllister outside of Savannah. And there's so many dramatic points built into the history of that.
Right.
General Sherman on the mill and General Hazen trying to get his.
Right.
What was it like? What was it like taking an already dramatic scene like that and spinning it into a story?
Well, every time I do that, I get caught up in the moment. I hope. If I don't, I shouldn't be writing it. I get excited, and that story is told from Hazen's point of view. It's his only chapter in the book. It's sort of I call them cameo chapters, and so you get Hazen's take because he's marching his troops. I mean, Sherman is miles away on top of a mill watching. He can't see very much. And Hazen marches his people, down a road he's never been on. They're looking at maps, hoping that they're right. He runs into the cavalryman, Kilpatrick, who tells him the right way to go, and also Kilpatrick tells him what he can expect when he gets to Fort McAllister. The Confederates, this is a fort typically on the sea coast that faces the ocean. So, of course, the big guns and the major defensive part of the fort faces the water because they're trying to hold the Union Navy from coming up the river. Well, on the land side, as happens so often, there's meager defense. The walls aren't built particularly well, and there's no etches in the walls for the cannons to hide themselves. These guys are standing in the open if they want to work their guns. All that's to Hazen's advantage. And when he sends his men across this cut field, where the Confederates have cut a field of fire behind the fort, they've cut down a bunch of trees, so it's all wide open so they can see if anybody's coming. The problem is they leave the stumps. Well, if you're advancing across this field, the skirmish lines coming across the field, they hide behind the stumps. And they have a perfect field of fire at the fort. I mean, it's not the best strategic move the Confederates ever made. Well, the fight itself lasts about 15 minutes, maybe 30 at the most, and the Union Army, Hazen, takes the fort. And Sherman's watching this. The other people who are watching this, and I love this little element that you don't really think about this. The United States Navy, they're sitting out here in the Union blockade. I mean, you've got naval ships all over the place. Admiral Dahlgren is out there. And they don't know where Sherman is. They don't know if they're ever going to see, Sherman ever going to get to the coast. Nobody has any idea where he is. All of a sudden, there's a fight at Fort McAllister. That they can see. They can see the explosions, they see the cannon shells, they see the smoke, and then here come blue soldiers up over the parapets at McAllister. That's the first time the Union Navy finds out Sherman's made it. He's here on the coast. And, of course, Sherman goes out and meets with Admiral Dahlgren. It's a great scene. But I just love that getting away from hindsight. We know how it ends. We know that Sherman takes Savannah. But to those people who are doing this stuff, they don't know anything. They don't know what's going to happen the next minute. And that's my job, is to become a part of that and to feel that sense of suspense and excitement and the threat involved and make it into a good story. Well, the big battles, one of the problems with big battles, and I've done a bunch of them, is in some ways they're all the same. I mean, and one of the reasons people who've read the first 3 books of this set understand that my 2 soldiers, the 2 men from Wisconsin, Bauer and Willis, and I get a lot of questions about Bauer and Willis. They're composite characters. But these 2 guys, after 3 books, they were done. And it was time to let go, because to have Bauer, who's scared to death under fire with his bayonet, charging up yet another hill, there's only so many times you can do that. And it becomes the same story over and over again. And I had to get away from that, so I did, and so they're not in this 4th book, and it is different. And you have the cavalry instead. You have the Confederate cavalry and their perspective, because that's all there is in Georgia for the most part, is 4,000 Confederate cavalrymen under Joe Wheeler, and that's the only real force of Confederates there is to stop Sherman. 60,000 men. It doesn't work.
Okay, we've talked about a couple of your how you write the historical characters, but you talked about Bauer and Willis. So your composites and your fictional characters and these guys, these men and women that carry the story are woven into the story. And you're talking today again about a new type of character, a really compelling type of character that you've added to this book, and that's Franklin.
Right.
Tell us about Franklin and the role he's going to play in this.
This was a challenge. There is no research to do here. There are no memoirs and collections of letters that I can draw on like I do with the actual officers and soldiers. Franklin is a slave at a real place. It's Howell Cobb's plantation. Howell Cobb in central Georgia is the former governor of Georgia. He's now a Confederate major general. He leaves. He's gone. And the guys with the bullwhips, they're gone from the plantations. Well, the slaves are still there. And they're watching this blue army march by, and literally tens of thousands of them fall out into the road and follow Sherman's army. And Franklin is one of those. He's 19 years old. Franklin is an extremely intelligent man, although he is extremely uneducated. He's born and raised on that plantation. He's never been anywhere else. And so every single experience, every single thing he sees is brand new. And for us to kind of put ourselves in those shoes and see things through Franklin's eyes, that was a real challenge to write that. I mean, when he's following along the army and there are hundreds and hundreds of black faces around him, he didn't know there were that many slaves in the whole world. And suddenly he's surrounded by them. He sees Confederate currency, and he sees a vignette of slaves in a cotton field. And he can't for the life of him imagine why they would put that on a piece of currency. He sees, everything he sees is a brand new experience. He sees a town, never seen a town. He sees the city of Savannah, the ocean, boats, never seen any of that. And that story and how he evolves, his evolution through this, what he wants to do to help the army. The other thing he sees, he asks questions. One of those questions is, we're following the army and everybody's jubilant and it's euphoric, it's wonderful, we're free. Where are we going? Where's the army? Where are we going to end up? And then when the army goes home, all these soldiers who talk about going back to Ohio and Iowa and Illinois and places he's never heard of, what happens when they leave? What do we do then? What happens to me? I mean, these are questions that are very real in his mind, and then he finds out the hard way that not all these guys in blue are his friends. There's an episode at Ebenezer Creek, Georgia, which is absolutely historically accurate, where something bad happens. I'll just leave it at that. And a lot of these freed slaves turn around and go home. They say, it's kind of like better the devil you know. They say, we didn't realize that some of these boys in blue, Miss Lincoln's boys, and that's the phrase you hear a lot, they're not all our friends. They're not all looking out for us. And a lot of them are not happy we're here. That's a surprise. So it's a part of the story.
Well, I'm glad you brought this up before, you bring it up again. Now, these people don't know what's happening. These people don't know how the war ends.
No.
It's happening
Right.
in front of them. That's why we're going to show something right here, because this was the news. This is the New York Herald, and it's December 26, 1864. Jeff, you've probably seen that headline.
Yep.
All that kind of
Yes.
stuff. And so, here's how New Yorkers found out for the first time. And that famous, we're probably all familiar. We like the Civil War. We read about it. Sherman's Christmas gift to, where did Sherman come out? He came out at Savannah. And how did the North find out about it? With this dramatic gesture I give to the United States as a Christmas gift.
The city of Savannah.
Yeah. And so that moment when you find out is so compelling. And this is why, it's one of the reasons why we do what we do, selling and dealing in this stuff, because this is the immediate. This is the moment. This is the rag paper that they had. This is something like that, and it's just magnificent. And that's one of the things that's so great about this series of books and the ones that you've already written. You don't know. We know how the war is going to end. We don't know how the book's going to end.
Right. Yeah, I got a review once saying they were caught off guard by the suspense in the story, and my question was, do you not know how the story ends? I mean, why is it suspenseful? But then I realized that's an incredible compliment, and I take that very seriously.
Well, I want people at home to buy all the books, but I especially want them to buy this one. This is the one that's out right now, and I'm going to put it up here so you can see it. It's Jeff Shaara. It's the Fateful Lightning. It's the fourth book of the tetralogy. It's from Random House, and I want to thank Random House for sending Jeff here. The price is $28, and we will still have signed copies of it available after this event is done. But I want to put that up there so you can see it, because I want to move away for the last few minutes here. I want to give a chance to move away from this, because there's something else you said today at Kenosha that really struck me very hard. For a long time you've been writing about the Civil War, and you admitted to a group today, and I imagine you've been saying you probably are not going to visit this topic anytime soon.
Right.
How do you feel about that?
It's difficult. It's emotional. The nature of what I do, the kind of research I do, getting into the heads of these characters. In order to put words in the mouths of any character, I have to feel as though not only do I know him, I love him. I mean, that may sound odd, but having to kill a character, Stonewall Jackson, the death of Stonewall is one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. The same was true, the death of the Red Baron in my World War I book. That's extraordinarily difficult for me. I bawl, literally, as I'm writing it. But this, when I end a series, now I'm saying farewell to all of these characters. And some of these characters, like Sherman, and there are others that I've been with for 4 books. And now I'm done. And I'm saying goodbye to them. And I don't want this to sound self-indulgent, but it really is an emotional thing for me, because I'm leaving them behind. And I've done my job as best as I can do it to try to bring them to you and bring them, to life in whatever way I can. And now it's over. And now I have to move on somewhere else. And that is more difficult than I expected, certainly.
Well, the place we're going next is, as I understand it, we're going to Korea.
Yes.
Tell us why Korea now.
Well, first of all, I was going to do Korea 4 years ago, and the sesquicentennial came along, and I sort of sidetracked me
Strange,
a
it
little bit.
surprised all of us.
Yes,
it was going to happen.
I know, yeah. But no, I hear from a lot of Korean War vets who are saying, hey, we're getting older too. Just like the World War II guys, the Korea vets are getting older. And I love telling you stories that you don't really know. You know what most Americans know about Korea? MASH. Well, with all due respect, MASH is not about Korea at all. It's about Vietnam. Yeah. It says Korea, but it really is a Vietnam story. What about Incheon? What about the Chosin Reservoir? What about the Yalu River? That's Korea. And you may have heard the names, but do you really know the story? And I'm just starting work on this. I'm very excited about this. I've gotten a huge amount of material. Talk about material being sent to me from readers. A huge amount of material from Korean War vets and their families. A massive box that I've got to start going through now, as well as 65 books that I will read between now and the end of the year, an enormous number of memoirs, a lot of stuff about MacArthur and Truman, which is a whole story in itself. I'm not sure what the story will be, but I'm very excited to get started on this. I'll be working on it all fall. I'll be working on it into next year. I don't have a publication date yet. I'll know it when I'm there. But I'm very excited.
That sounds like a very exciting topic. Well, one thing I was thinking about, you obviously visited all the Civil War battlefields. It's going to be tough with Pork Chop Hill being 20 miles on the wrong side of the
Actually, the other one,
DMZ.
I mentioned this to an audience because I found out that the Chosin Reservoir, one of the most shocking, horrible episodes in our military history, is in the north. And I had a guy say to me at a book signing last week, well, I can get you in. And I'm thinking, I really don't want to get my name in the paper that way. So I think I'll leave North Korea alone. But no, I do intend to go to Korea. The museum in Seoul is a spectacular place. I really want to see that and talk to some people there. So I'm very excited about that.
It would be tough getting inside Kim Il-sung's head if you decide you want to do it.
Yeah, true.
Say you look into the pit, you become
Yeah, exactly.
you look into madness, you become. But we'll find out how you deal with that.
Good.
After you find out.
After I find out.
How you're going to deal with that. Thank you, Jeff. Thanks for coming back to Chicago. Thanks for doing a couple events with us. Thank you to the people who are watching at home.